Hi everyone. So it looks like it is 6 o'clock now. So we're going to get started now. So welcome back everyone. Thanks for coming. Today we have our first session, session one. So last time we were just having an introduction, and you had a chance to get your coding environment set up a little bit, and a chance to get to know your mentors, introduce yourselves, get to know them, and play some games with them. So today is session one, and we're going to be learning some actual programming. We're going to get to do some coding, and you'll get to do some hands-on exercises, and uh, I, with your mentors as well, you'll be able to work with them. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, apologize 1 second. I just want to get the chat window open up. All right, I saw there's just a question about missing the last session. It's not. It was mostly introductions last time. So I'm just going to go over getting your notebook ready, which was that coding environment. So that's what we're going to start with, is just how to start that getting that coding environment set up, getting your notebook opened, and how to get a bit of code going there. And then we're going to get into the actual writing some code. So you've got two sections of your code. There's a part for doing some setup code, and we've got a draw part. And then we'll learn about how to be drawing shapes, how to be outputting some text, and then we'll learn about variables and operators. And at the end, we will go through a bit of interaction of how you can use your mouse to actually interact with what you're drawing. All right, so we're gonna just go a bit through getting set up. So hopefully this worked out for you last time. So just gonna go through these slides quickly, and then I'll actually show that in my browser. So you log in at the site here, ignite.airnight.com. Then you create a new notebook. That's under the file, new notebook, and then the kernel, you just click select to get that. And then in your first cell, you need these two lines there. You just need import Spark and the percent reload extension Spark. And then you have to execute that cell. Then you can create a new cell. And in there at the very top, you need to have this little line in there, 2% ignite. And then after that, you'll put in all your code. So I'll show how that all looks. So here I have I've went to the ignite.airnight.com, and once you sign in, it should give you this dashboard in there. And so once you're there, we have under the file, you can create a new notebook. And once you go to there, you just need to click select to get the right kernel. And now in here, we have that little piece of code from those slides. You can just refer to the slides for those. So we put in those two lines there, and you can press the play button, or you can also just press Shift Enter. That's a pretty common shortcut that you can use to execute your cells. And then in here, for where you actually want to put in your code, at the top you'll put in double % ignite. And then your code will be going to here. So just to show that it's working, I can use this function here. You can see it's running. It says done drawing, and at the bottom it shows that text that I had in there. All right, so we'll get to in just a moment how to actually be writing this code and how to get things drawing on there. You can't hear the audio. I think everyone else is able to hear the audio. All right, so that was just a review of how to get started with where to put your code. So for your actual code, once you've got that cell there, you're going to want to put some setup functionality under a setup function. And so this first line up at the top here is a def setup with brackets and a colon. So you need that. And then any code that you want to run just a single time at the very start of your program, that code is going to go in here. It's going to go after it, and you'll need to put in a tab. And so these tabs let you know that that's actually inside of that setup function that you are creating. So then we have the draw one, which this one is where your code for actually drawing things is going to go. And this is going to be executed over and over again in a loop. So it's going to keep drawing whatever code that you have there is just going to keep drawing onto the screen repeatedly. And that's going to be really handy when we have some interactivity. It's going to be updating that screen. You're going to be able to update what you're seeing. And again, you need to have that single tab to put in there. And we're going to be learning about all the different things you can put inside here to actually draw onto that screen. So we're going to start with the simplest command that you can run, which is the print function. And what this does is that it outputs whatever you are, whatever argument, whatever value that you're putting inside of here. So in this case, for this example here, with the print hello world, it's printing whatever is inside these double quotes. It's printing that text hello world with that exclamation mark. So I'm just going to show with adding in that function that we want. So in here, we're going to have our def setup. We want to have our indentation there, and we can move this. We can move this inside into our setup there, and let's make it say hello world. So when we run that, it should output at the bottom the hello world. Now I'm just going to do the shortcut Shift Enter to execute that. And at the bottom, we can see that it has hello world. So comments, you'll see these quite a lot, that with the hashtag, anything that appears after that is just treated as a comment. It's not actually seen by the computer. The computer is not going to care. It's not going to care about it. Okay, so for our screen, we're going to want to give it a size. And so this is something we can put into our setup function to set how large of the screen that we want to be drawing onto. So in here, you can't quite see that we do actually have a small screen. It is there, it's pretty small. I can just color this just to show that it is there, that this is our screen there. If we want to make it a nice big size, then we will use the size function. We can make it a nice big size for us. So let's set this to 600 by 800, just the same as that example. And now we're going to see that we have a much larger screen here. Maybe a little bit too large. So the screen coordinates, the 600 and 800 is going to corresponding with the width and the height. And how the coordinate system works is the same as reading, that if you're reading left to right and top to bottom. So it makes sense to have 0, 0 at the top left-hand corner. And then we have increasing width and increasing height. And you can see that the bottom right-hand corner then, in this case, we have 600 was the width, 800 was the height. So we have 600, 800 at the bottom. So this is going to be important for how to define where you want to draw something. How do you want to position what you're drawing on that window? So let's get to actually drawing something. So we kind of skipped ahead with this drawing this background here. So we can just take this part out. And if we want to be drawing a rectangle, we have this function here. It's a rect, just short for rectangle. And we need to give it 4 pieces of information. We need to tell it where we want this positioned. So we need to give it the X and Y coordinates, which are going to be according to the screen coordinates that we just went over in the last slide. And the rectangle has to have a width and it has to have a height. So those are the other 2 pieces we need to put in. And these are all going to be numbers. So let's try adding in a rectangle there. We can make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so everyone can see. So here we'll put in our draw section, and here we will draw a rectangle. We can put it somewhere in the middle. So if you want to put it somewhere in the middle, let's put it around like 150 to 100 and make it fairly big. Let's say 70 by 90. And we're going to see that we have a rectangle showing up on our screen. We can do this another time. We can have more rectangles if we want. So we can put this one near the top of the top left of the screen. We can make this one a lot smaller. Let's make it really wide. Let's make it 150 by 20. So you can see we got our wide rectangle sitting there at the top, and we got our other rectangles too. So for all those different rectangles, you can just keep adding those rectangles and it will draw all your rectangles there. So we're not limited to just rectangles. We've got a function for drawing a circle as well. For drawing the circle, it's also needs to take in a bit of information. So it also has the X and Y coordinates, but this time it corresponds to the very center of the circle. And then circles, they have a diameter. So it takes 1 piece of information to set the diameter. So let's add a circle onto our screen here. And we can if we put this one in the, need to spell that correctly. We can put it in the top right-hand corner. If we put the X coordinates to be close to the width, and we can leave the height to be a fairly small number. And we can make our diameter medium-sized. This is going to draw our circle. You can see it's a little bit cut off. We can drop it down a little bit. And we've got our circle in the top right-hand corner. Okay, so so far what you've seen is that we're just drawing a black shape that's all completely filled in. But we can also draw an outline of a shape, or we can have just the inner part, or we can have the inner part with that outer border as well. So the 3 different ways to be drawing something, what we already saw was the rect. And if you want to have just the filled in portion, you'll have the fill rect, fill underscore rect. And for just stroking the outside border of the rectangle, we have stroke underscore rect. And I know that you're probably wondering, how are we going to get these colors? So we're going to get to that in just a bit. And then it will make a bit more sense why we have this difference between rect and the fill rect. Because we can decide what color we also want for this border, for this outline around the rectangle. And the same thing for the circle. It's the exact same, just replace the rect with circle, and you have all the same ways to draw. All right, so now we've gone to our first quick question. So a poll is going to come up in just a moment. And we're wondering what values of x and y and d are going to make a circle so that we have a radius of 50, and we want to have the edges of it to be touching the top left-hand corner, just as you see in the, as you can see on the picture on the right here. And there is some ignite points available here, 10 ignite points, if you do get this question correct. Okay, I think that's been enough time to get most answers. So we did have most of the people did have the correct answer. We had 52% that was on the same one. So with the diameter, we have to set that to 100. So if we have a diameter of 100, then our radius is going to be a 50. And remember that our x and y is going to be at the center of the circle. So if you want the edges to be touching, then we need them to be a distance of 50 away from each of those edges. So let's actually try this out. And let's see that we can just double check to see if that answer was making sense. Okay, so here we have our circle. We'll put in x and y of 50, and we'll set the diameter to 100. So let's run that. And we can see that our circle is touching the edges there. So that does work. If we tried something like 0, 0, then the problem would be that it would be off the screen because the center of the circle is at that position. So if you want the edges to be touching, we're going to need to offset it a little bit. Okay, so now we're on to the colors because just the black and gray is a little bit boring. So we want to be able to have whatever colors that you want. And so there are two different ways of using this function. So the function is called fill underscore style. And you can either pass in 3 numbers, and these numbers are going to set a red amount, a green amount, and a blue amount. And by combining these together, you can get any color that you want. The amounts in these are going to be a value from 0 to 255. If you're curious why it's 255, you can ask your mentors. And the other option is to pass in the name of a color. So if you want red or green or blue, we can put in the name of that color, and it needs to be in these double quotes. And we're going to learn it in just a little bit later on that is called a string. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So for now, let's add some colors into here. So this fill style, we're going to have to call it before we draw our circle. So let's do the fill style, and let's start with just giving it a name. So if we tell it to have red, we can see that the inside is now red. It has a bit of a border that's been stroked in black. If we want to draw something else as well, let's bring our rectangle back in. So this one is now also going to be colored red because this fill style is applying to everything after that. It's a little bit like dipping your paintbrush into a certain color, and then whatever you draw with it is going to be set to that color. So if we want this rectangle to be a different color, then we're going to have to set that color in here. So let's try the other version where we have the 3 numbers. So if we have different combinations of these, so we can do 255 of red, 255 of green, and 0 of blue, and that's going to give us yellow. So you can see that combine those together, we can get different colors. And so this is really nice that if you want to customize your colors however you want, you can get all shades in between there. And the more color that you put into it, the lighter it's going to be. If you want to have the black, you would need to have zeros for each of these. And so if you have 0 of everything, then that's black because you don't have any color. So that's what's going to give us the black. So another function that we're going to introduce is background. So the background is going to paint over the entire screen. So it's not going to change the background. It's not exactly going to change the background that's sitting behind what we've drawn on it. It's just going to draw over top of everything that we have. So for that reason, we want to put that at the very start of this draw function, because if we put it at the end, it's going to paint over everything that we've tried to draw. So this background, it takes the same, takes those same parameters as the fill style that we saw. So we can either pass in those numbers, or we can give a name of a color. So let's put in, we can put in the name of color. Let's try purple color. So now you can see that we have our background is now purple, because that's the first thing that happens, is that it paints everything purple. If we were to put this at the very end, all that we would see is just the purple background, because everything is painting over everything else. So this background is going to need to go at the very start if we want to actually be painting over top of it and seeing the shapes that we're drawing on top of that background. Okay, so that's basically what I was explaining there. Background is painting the entire window with that color. It doesn't know that you already have shapes there, so it's just going to paint over top of everything else. With the fill style, that one is much like dipping your paintbrush into a certain color, and from then on afterwards, it's going to be using that color for whatever you're trying to draw. Okay, so now it's going to be your turn to try this out. So you're going to go into Breakout Rooms, and you're going to have a chance to try out all those different draw functions, setting different colors, drawing the different rectangles, and we want you to draw the Calgary Tower. So there's an example here on the right. You can follow that, or you can be creative. You can come up with how you would like to draw it. And also think about what else do you want to draw. You might add something to the background, add some other buildings. It's all up to you. All right, so we're going to put you into Breakout Rooms. You're going to have 10 minutes for that. Something drawn that is looking pretty good. So I'll show the example as to how this one was actually drawn here. So we can put this in a new cell. So I do already have this code in here. So we had to set up the colors for each of the different pieces, and then be drawing each of those different parts. So this example here, if we were to run this piece, this is how we were getting this example one there. You didn't have to have exactly, it didn't have to look exactly like this, but that's how that's working. You just need to have different rectangles and just setting the color in before it. All right, so now the next part that we're going to be going over is variables. So variables are very important. You're going to be using them a lot, and they're going to help you in a lot of different ways. So a variable is much like a box or a container for something. You're able to take a value and put it into that box, and that box is going to have a label onto it. So all variables they have a name, and they're going to be storing a value, which is the thing that they are containing. So then you can, instead of referring to the value, you can use its name, and wherever you use that name, it's going to evaluate, it's going to become that value. And values also have different types. And so that's the next part that we're going to talk about is the different types that these values can have. So the first type is an integer. So an integer is exactly as you expect. It's just like a math integer. It's a whole number. So it doesn't have any fractional part, doesn't have any a decimal place to it. So the examples that we have here, you can have positive and negative numbers as well. And all that you do to create that integer is specify that number. This has to be just numbers. So you just put in the sequence of numbers, and that's going to be your integer. So pretty similar are the numbers that have the decimal places, and these we call floats. And that's because they have this decimal place. You can call it a floating point. And so to create these ones, if you need to have that decimal place in there, and then that's going to make it a float. So there's some examples here, and you can notice also that even if you have a dot 0, that is also considered a float. And the next type that we'll talk about is what's called a string, and the string is just a fancy name for text. It's a string of letters. You can think of it as just a sequence of letters that are put together. So to create this, you need to wrap your text in quotation marks. So we've already seen a few examples of these on the slides. And what we saw was with the double quotes, but it is also possible to use single quotes. You just have to make sure that whatever is at the start has to also be at the end of it. And on all these slides, we're just going to be sticking with double quotes. Some examples here. You can see we've got good night, UFC, 4th Street. So I'll just give a bit of example here with those different variables. So I'll create actually a new cell. So I'll put my code inside the setup. So if we want to use for an integer, we can have number of students. And one thing you'll notice is that we usually use these underscores instead of spaces because you're not allowed to have spaces between in that variable name. And let's see, how many students do we have right here? Well, we have 104 participate, so let's say 104. And we can use that print to actually print out, display what that is. So we have that being printed out there. We can also have a float. So number of students, that can't be a float because we don't have fractional parts of students. But let's see, we can have a temperature. And the temperature might be negative 28.5. I think it's something around that, close to that right now. And if we want to display that, we can print the value of what's inside temperature. And we can see that it's being displayed at the bottom there. And we can also have strings. So if you want to, for example, capture someone's name, so I can put in my name. Oh, we need to have that equal sign. Chris. We can have a last name. I have a pretty long last name. And here we can print out those variables. And we see that my name has been printed out. The quotation marks are not part of that. It's only what's inside the quotation mark that is part of that value of that string. All right, there's just another little example in here. Setting the height into there. So when it's printing that, it's looking at evaluating what is contained inside that height variable, and so it is printing out 10 because height at that time is equal to 10. All right, so now we are at our next quick question. So the question here is, what type of value, so we went over those three different types, what type of value is being assigned to this variable that we're calling today? Okay, and that looks like we've got no more answers coming in. All right, so most people answered float, and that's not actually the correct answer. So the correct answer for this one was the string. And the reason for that is because a string is anything that's contained inside those double quotes. So that's what makes it a string, is that it's in the double quotes. It doesn't matter that the characters inside of it look like a float. To Python, it just says, well, it's inside double quotes. That makes it a string. All right, so now we're on to our next exercise. And for this exercise, the first thing that you're going to do is to take this code. So you can, when you use the slides, you can just copy it from that slide, run this code, and you'll see that it's outputting this piece. And so that's the first part. And the second part is going to be to change it so that the snowmen are moved a little bit. So you'll change your code so that both of the snowmen are moved 50 pixels right, 50 pixels down, and then have a look at which snowman it was easier to make that change to. So we're going to put you into the breakout rooms to work on this. We're going to do about 8 minutes for that. Diameter, well, they would need to be half of that. So let's just try coding this out as well and see how we would get to that. So here, if we want to draw the circle, so we already had this example that if we draw it at 50-50, and we have a diameter of 100, then we can see that it's just touching the edges there. But this diameter might be a different size. So if this diameter ended up being 200, then it's no longer touching those edges. So we would have to adjust these values. If we adjusted them to 100 and 100, we would see that they would be touching that. So now let's change this with a variable, and we can have our variable in here, set that to a 200. So this is going to be working. It's touching the edge, but now the question is, how do we decide what these two values are, the x and the y? So we figured out that it needs to be half the value of that d. So we can put in here, we can put d divided by 2, and here we can also have d divided by 2. And right now it should do the same thing because it's all going to give us the same numbers. But now when we adjust this diameter in here, if you want a even bigger circle, and we can see that's still touching that edge of the screen there. I'm going to add a bit of a background. It's maybe not entirely, just so you're completely convinced that it is touching the edges there. If we want to have it even smaller, if you have even a 50, still doing the exact same thing. All right, so that's why those variables are handy. That's one reason. So we could see that's helping us there. All right, so now we're going to talk about a few special variables, the mouse x and the mouse y. And these variables contain the value of where the mouse cursor is. So the mouse x is going to give the x coordinate of the mouse, and the mouse y is going to give the y coordinate for the mouse. And these are always just going to be updated. So in that draw function, whenever you're moving the mouse, those variables will have the coordinates of wherever the mouse is. So here's one example. I'm going to show this, actually code this up and show you how that looks. So we've got pretty similar here already. We already have our size set up in there. What we're going to do is we want to use the put our code under the draw function because we need to have this updating we need to have it keep updating continuously. So it has to redraw every time that we're moving the mouse. We want it to be redrawn. So we got, let's see, what background there? There's a gray background. Fill style for our rectangle. And now we will put in those variables, the mouse x and the mouse y. So that means that our rectangle should be drawn wherever our mouse x and our mouse y is. So now when we run that, oh, where do we have fill style? Oh, this rectangle, yes. So this rectangle needs to have 4 arguments, it says, and I didn't put in the last one. So this was just the width. I need to have a height for it as well. Okay, so as soon as you move your mouse in there, you can see that the square is following wherever your mouse is. It might be a little bit laggy, but you can see that it's following whatever path that you have. It's trying to follow the mouse x and the mouse y. That's where it's going to get drawn each time. All right, so now we're on to the end of session exercises. So these ones are going to be worth some Ignite points. And we're going to go into the breakout rooms. That's going to be basically to the end of today's session till 7:30. So there's exercises, 2 of them for the bug busters, and we have 2 more exercises for Pythonic lava. And then there's also some extra exercises just for fun. So this is using what we've learned today. It's using the different parts. May seem a little bit complicated. It does require using those in different ways, but you should be able to get these working for you with a little bit of help, perhaps, from your mentor. All right, so we're going to go to the breakout rooms now, and that's going to take us to the end of the session.